Hi guys, this is Jeanette from Backroom Creations. Tonight we are going to make a bubble wreath. You don't need a lot of materials, and it does give you a very full wreath, and you can even use thinner mesh for this. So what you're going to need is a frame. This is a 14¼ inch Dollar Tree frame. Your scissors, a couple zip ties, 21-inch mesh. I chose a foiled mesh. It's a little thin. You can see my hand through it, but once it gets bubbled up, it'll be just fine. So we're going to pan down so you can see what I'm doing. And we're going to need a bunch of white pipe cleaners. Now you can cut yours in half, but if you're a little arthritic in your hands and you have a hard time grasping smaller things, you can just leave them full. You will waste a little bit. So we're going to even up our edge. Always start with a clean edge. And that's really the only cut at the very beginning and the very end that you will have to make. So this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections, and we will put anywhere from 5 to 6 poofs in each section, so it will be really full. This will not be a wreath that you will use a lot of ribbon for, but we are going to put a nice big bow on it at the end. Now if you don't have a mesh roller, it's not a necessity. I just like to drop it on the floor right in front of me, and I can still control it. So what we're going to do is we're going to gather up our ends, just like as we're going to do a basic poof mesh. And then we're going to start at a cross member with a zip tie. Kind of stick mine under there a little bit. We are only going to use the middle 2 wires. The outside and the inside we will not use in this one. Now, I only like to zip tie it to 1 because when you do it to 2, there's a little bit of give, and you don't want the end of your mesh coming up after you make your wreath. So make that nice and tight. Also a pair of snips, diagonal cutters, whatever you like, to cut off your zip tie. If you want to clean that up a little bit, you can, either at the beginning or the end. Of course, it makes a mess, but it'll be okay. And flip it back over. So the size poof that we're going to do, I'm going to do a 10. And you want to keep the edges of your mesh kind of rolled down because you don't want them sticking out in this one. You want them nice and under. So I'm going to have my little zip tie at the 15-inch mark, and we'll go up to 25. Now I'm going to start this out in one way, and then we're going to switch to another way. This is the traditional way that a lot of people do the bubble wreath. And then I found a little bit simpler way for myself. And this is usually why people use a half a pipe cleaner, because they fasten it and twist it on the back. I preferably like to twist it on the front. It keeps it a little bit cleaner on the back. And when I use a longer tie, I can get a tighter grip on the mesh. Now, because we are not putting ribbon tails between each poof, you can go ahead and cut your pipe cleaner and be done with it. So you can poof as you go, or you can do a section and then poof it. But if you kind of want to see how you're doing, you could go ahead and do it now. It will be a little cumbersome in the very beginning, only because, well, 1, my mesh is not going to stick together, and 2, because these will slide around a little bit. So like I said, we're going to do this first section the way everybody I have seen does it, and then we're going to switch to my way. So it all basically comes down to what's more comfortable for you. So you don't have to have the pipe cleaner up where you're going to have it in the end, because this will slide back and forth. So if you do have some thinner meshes that maybe don't give you good coverage, this is an excellent way to use them up. So I do measure my poofs even when I do a regular poof, just because I want the same consistency throughout my wreath. Some people use a 1, 2, 3 method. Some people use their arms. Whatever works for you is fine. Like I said, when I have longer pipe cleaners, it's easier for me to grasp onto them. Go ahead and cut these. I have seen a couple people put ribbon tails between their poofs. It's not something that I care to do. This also gives you a nice simple, if you do have a shop, this gives you a nice simple project that you can add to your shop at a lower price point. So we just keep sliding these over. We're at 1, 2, 3. This is our 4th poof. How many poofs you get per section probably also depends on the thickness of your mesh. This is a pretty densely foiled mesh, so I may not get 6, and I usually at the end will not get 6. I know this does waste some pipe cleaners doing it this way, but if you have arthritic hands, it saves a little bit of tension on your arms. So you see how these just keep sliding? You just want to keep sliding over. So I am going to get another one in here. Just shove them on over. Have them make some room. Give it a good 2 or 3 twists. Make sure it's going to stay in there. I always leave a little bit. You never know when a mistake might happen, and you need something to help undo your pipe cleaner so you can fix your mistake. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I only did get 5. So that's good. So you can push this over really, really hard. And if you wanted to get another one in there, I feel that this mesh is going to give a pretty good coverage because it is a highly foiled one. So we're going to just stick with the 5. Now we're going to switch to my way of doing them. Because I do use full pipe cleaners, you can afford to have a couple extra twists. So I go ahead and load pipe cleaners onto the frame first, as if we were doing a traditional wreath. Just remember to use only those first 2 or middle 2 wires. The outer ones you are not going to use. Now, I'm used to tying my pipe cleaners tight, and in this case you probably don't want them tight because you want them to be able to slide together. So remember, if you're going to do it, try it this way. Don't make them too tight or else they will not move. So we can go ahead and push this on over. We'll fluff it back up in the end. So I use my 15 to my 25, which is still 10 inches. If you do if you do it this way and you put your pipe cleaner on too tight, if you pinch your 2 bars together, it'll help you slide. Just like that. And this is the method that you go all the way around. Make sure your mesh is not getting too twisted. Mine's giving a little twist. I don't want my edges all the way together, but we do want them to point down. This also is a nice wreath. It's not real thick. It is 4 to 5 inches thick, depending on the depth of your front door. If you have a screen door, it will work on some of them. And you can poof as you go, or you can wait. Totally up to you. If you have any grandchildren, they like those little edges of the ends of the pipe cleaners. Mine make little people with them. But she's got enough, so she doesn't need any more. If you wanted to put a sign on a bubble wreath, you could. I have before on fabric mesh ones. And I've also just done them where I put a bow on them. And people seem to like those as well. The biggest thing is you do want, see if your edges are starting to come out like that, just tuck them under. This mesh has a little bit of a ragged edge because it is a high foiled mesh, but you can just take that and just turn it up inside and it will be just fine. I've also seen people use two different kinds of mesh. I've seen a patriotic one where most of it was a red and white stripe mesh, and then they did a solid blue and glued on some little hearts for a patriotic wreath. It's also an idea. There's different ways that you could embellish a bubble wreath besides using ribbon. Let's see if we can get an extra one in here. Yeah. Like I said, depending on the thickness of your mesh will determine if you need to put 5 or 6 poofs in your sections. And you will have a slight hole in the middle. I usually don't like holes in the middle of mine, but because I'm not adding a sign or anything, it doesn't bother me. Usually that hole is to keep your embellishments or your sign or bow up and not falling down into a hole. So this mesh does have a little bit of a frayed edge. We're just going to tuck that back up in there. So when you're poofing, just don't pull it all the way out. We'll go ahead and load some of these. Just keep scrunching them together. And just remember not to tie them too tight because you do want these to move. As your wreath gets fuller, you may have a section that only take 4. Kind of depends on the look that you're going for. Fabric mesh is a little more forgiving. I usually do my bubble wreaths in a fabric mesh. It's a little bit softer on the hands as well. But nonetheless, you can do it with any 21-inch mesh that you want. I did one last Christmas that was with a high foiled. This is pretty high foil. It was a little bit more foiled than this one. It was green and red, and it was really cute for Christmas. Now, if you don't like, I have a little bit of twist to my poofs. If you don't like that, you just need to watch when you're making your poof. I don't mind it. Keep sliding them over. my poof part underneath. So we'll just bring that back up. While you're watching the tutorial on YouTube, I would appreciate if you would subscribe and click the bell for notifications. My normal live nights are Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Central Eastern Standard Time. I just fold those over. They're there if you need them. Make sure to get all your mesh out and poof so you have the same size poofs. And turn that edge under if you need to. This is probably the worst frayed one that I've ever used. I didn't realize it was going to be so frayed, or else I might have chosen another one. But we'll go ahead and get through it. So normally when I start one of these, I do preload it with 5 per section. That way, if I need to add one in here and there, it's not a big deal. But I wanted to show you both ways. If you want to conserve your pipe cleaners, of course, cut them in half. You'll do it as you go, and you'll twist them on the underneath instead of between the poofs. A little bit more cumbersome, but nonetheless effective. This is the one time that you can have loosey-goosey pipe cleaners on your frame. Okay, so let's see if we can get in a, yeah, we can get in another one. Kind of just all depends on how it goes. You do want them really tight. Make a nice full wreath. You can wait to cut all your pipe cleaners at the end, but if you do that, you might run the risk of missing a couple, as I did the first time when I made one. On fabric mesh, I usually do not have to pull the edges up under. Of course, fabric mesh is a little bit more expensive, but it is a little nicer. They have some really nice farmhouse check patterns and stripes in the fabric mesh. If you're going for like a farmhouse or natural colors. The poly jute is also a nice one. I love the natural poly jute, and if you're looking at something more everyday or farmhouse, that is also a good one. So we're going to jump down to our next section. We've already got halfway through it. These go rather quickly, especially if you do it the way that I normally do, and you have all your pipe cleaners preloaded and you only have to add in a few here and there. They go really quick. I still sometimes think I'm doing something wrong because they're moving around, but they'll just move around until you get your section full. Poofs intimidate some people, but really there's not a whole lot to be intimidated for. If you don't have a mat, you can just tape a ruler to the side of your table and you can use that to measure. Some people count as they pull out the mesh. Some people use their arm. Biggest thing is you don't have a lot of cutting to do, so there is less fraying unless you have something kind of like this one that is a little ragged on the edges, but it'll be okay. We'll make it work. Make sure your twists are pretty tight. You don't want any of your pipe cleaners coming undone after your wreath is done. So see, that one didn't want to, there we go. Just kind of push your two wires together and it'll move for you. The foil mesh is a pretty mesh. Sparkles in the light, especially for something for the holidays, Christmas. Fall, I would probably choose a more natural, maybe even a brown or an orange. Let's see if we can get another one in there. Yeah, I do believe we can. Then after this poof, we'll go ahead and load up the rest of our frame, so we won't have to mess with them anymore. There we go. And if bows aren't your thing yet, you can most certainly just leave it plain and hang it up to sparkle in the light. Okay, so let's go ahead and load up the rest of ours. Remember to only use the middle two wires. And they don't have to be tight because you do want them to move. I usually only, when I preload them, I preload 4, maybe 5. Once you start doing them, you'll figure out what meshes that you're using will determine, and how thick you want it, you know, how close you want your bubbles together. why they call it a bubble wreath instead of poof wreath. Somebody else did that. Kind of does just look like bubbles going over and over. Okay, we'll start there. We'll probably have to add a couple, but that'll be all right. I will say this is only the second higher foil mesh that I've used. This one's a little rough on the fingers. Of course, when you're used to the fabric mesh, that'll happen. Slide that on over as far as you can go. Look at that, I guessed right. Once you get to know making your wreaths, I still measure, but a lot of times I'm right on the mark. Sometimes I'm off a little bit. Kind of depends on how much I talk during my Facebook Lives. Get your pipe cleaners all snagged up. This would be a nice color for like a winter bubble wreath. Could probably go from winter and then straight into New Year's if you wanted to. Got my edges twisted up a little bit, just twist them back down. In this particular method, that doesn't show very well. So even though you want your pipe cleaners to be able to slide, you do want to twist, when you put your mesh in there, you want to twist it really tight because that helps to form your bubble. I think we're going to get one more in here. Yeah. Whoops, that slid with it. Come back. There we go. The last section is a little cumbersome because you want to make sure that you get enough poofs in there to be nice and full, but yet you're working in a more cramped space. Poofing those out. Okay. Ah! That hung up. There we go. So I've got four on here. I'm pretty confident that 4 will go in. We'll see about the 5th one. It'll will be a little harder for you to see down in here because it's getting pretty tight. But I'm just doing the exact same thing I've done all the way around the wreath. Two more in here. And I'm almost to the end of my roll. It will use up almost a complete roll of 21 inch mesh. Probably the complete roll if you get 6 poofs in each section. And we all know that sometimes our rolls are not a full 10 yards. So I like to account for that also in measuring. Too big by an inch. We'll see if we can go ahead and use up almost the rest of this and one more. We'll see how it looks. Oh yeah, we'll get one more in here. And then at the very end we will use another zip tie to make sure it's secured. We don't want to lose. So here's the end of my mesh. And we'll cut that off. I literally am wasting 10 inches. So some of those places where I only put 5, I could have put 6 and used the entire roll, but you just never know. So we're gonna go ahead and just, I leave a little bit, about 3 or 4 inches, and then I can trim it more. So we're gonna get down in here, and we're gonna take our edge, and we're gonna feed it through just like when we started here. We're gonna feed that up through. It is a lot longer than I need it, but like I said, I do that to make sure I have enough. So that's your end. So I'm going to tuck this in down a little bit and tuck this one over. Then I'm only going to put it around 1 wire, because if you put it around 2, sometimes they just don't want to hold, and then you end up losing the end of your mesh. Now it isn't a pipe cleaner, so it probably would not go very far. But if you're selling them for someone or to someone, you don't want that to happen. And then we can clean this up a little bit. Now, like I said, if you wanted to leave it just like this, you have a nice bubble wreath. Go back around if you need to tidy up any sides. But your bubble wreath will end up being 22 inches. We are going to make a bow, so I can show you what it looks like with a bow. And we'll just do a nice drama bow. Or should we do a funky bow? Let's see here. I picked out some turquoise and some white and some black. Black always gives a pop to your bow. We'll start with the black on the back. Yeah, we'll just do a nice 3, 2, 1 long tails. Let's do 12-inch tails. I just pinch mine up like a little fan. You want your bow twist to be very, very tight. That's what makes your bow able to poof up. I like 6-inch loops. If you struggle at making bows, just practice. When I first started, I could not make a bow. And my first wreaths for the first few months did not have any bows. I do have a private class. It's called the Backroom Glitter Gang on Facebook. It is a paid class, but you get 2 live tutorials a week. And we do things at a little bit slower pace. And we talk about color matching, and we do lots of bow tutorials. So a 3, 2, 1 is exactly what it sounds. We're going to put 3 loops on each side in the back, and then 2, and then 1. If you've watched Kali, she likes to call it a blast-off bow. So what I'm doing here is I'm just scrunching mine down. My short little fingers will not turn 2.5-inch ribbon over. It's also easier when you have arthritis. Make sure that your bows or your loops are not moving, or else you will get uneven. But when I scrunch it down, I'm scrunching it down and then I'm twisting really tight and pushing it right back down into the bow maker. This is a deluxe easy bow maker. I'd say it's probably one of the more common ones used. I do have a bow dabber, but I like to use it just to hold my mesh. Now this is our last loop, so we will not do a twist. Some people like to make their bows and just stack their loops all up on top of each other. I have a fun little trick with a clothespin. You can also go to learnfromjeanette.com if you'd like more instruction on how to make some wreaths. So I usually just use my other tail to measure, or if you want to use a ruler, you can. I got a little off center there, so we'll just correct that. There's nothing perfect in crafting. We all make mistakes. But this is how we learn. This is how I learned. And this is how I want to teach people. So I kind of spread out my bows, how I'm going to have them in my bow. I spread out my loops. That's how I'm going to make them in my bow. I can talk tonight. So we're going to use we're going to use this one. I always have other options out. I have to think about it sometimes. This is a brand new ribbon. They always fold it over. It's creased highly. I do not suggest that you worry about the inch or 2 that you will lose. Sometimes they pull over 4 inches, but none the same. It will be a kink in your bow forever. So I'm just using my pre-existing loop to my tail to measure. If you want to use your board, you can. It's the same method, but now we're going to drop down 1 inch. I always like to bring all my tails out. So these were 6, and then now these are going to be 5. You have to remember that sunny side up, ugly side down when you go to make your next loop. So an easy bow maker has numbers on the side, it has numbers on the top. If you're really good, you can just eyeball it. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Really, really tight twist. The biggest thing is when you have the ugly side up, you want to make sure that you don't have any ribbon folded over right here. That will affect the way your bow is going to lay. You can just slide those loops out of the way if you need to use the measuring labels. Some people make their bows and all their loops are stacked straight up and then they move them all. Totally up to you. So we're going to do another set of loops. I try to hold my finger there. It helps to hold everything down. If you lose it for a second, just push back down. Or you can use a little clothespin trick, putting it on the dowel rod to keep it down while you change out your ribbon or get a drink. So this is our last loop that we need, so we will not twist in the middle. That's when my handy dandy clothespin comes out. They're nice. When they break, you throw them away and get another one. Some people do not like all their tails the same length. I will usually make my smaller, my 1.5 inch ribbon. This is 2.5 inch ribbon. On a 3-2-1 or a blast off, you use 2 2.5s and then a 1.5. Instead, I was going to use a plain white in here, but I've changed my mind. I love the tricolor, but of course this is a tricolor, but it's in the tricolor how they make them. They're usually in 3 colors. But black and white is classic. And if I'm going to put black in a bow, I will put it in the very last loop, even though I have put it on the bottom in this one. But you've got enough white in there to balance it off in each one. So this is a 1.5 inch. And we're going to drop down another inch. So you have 6 inches, 5 inches, and then 4 inches. Crunch that down and then we're done because we only want 1 loop on each side. Now how you end off your bow is totally up to you, whether you like to use a zip tie, floral wire, pipe cleaners. I tend to be a zip tie person. Oops, I like my long ones. This type of ribbon is not a highly wired one, but yet it will still hold its shape. So I take, you have the little box, you know, where you're going to fasten it. Make sure it's the right side up. I'm going to just start to tighten down my bow. If you want to attach your bows with a pipe cleaner, you can go ahead and do that now. Some people, depending on the depth of their wreath, will twist tie 2 together. And make a really long one. Just twist them in the opposite directions and it's not going anywhere. So whether you use a zip tie or pipe cleaner or floral wire, just make sure you remember to put something in there to attach your bow with. Now I'm still not completely tight in there. I pushed down really hard, and this is our little stack where it was in the middle of the dowel rods. So I'm just going to pull it over. I'm going to bring my little box and my pipe cleaners all the way to the bottom. And then I'm going to tighten up just a little bit more. We are still not fully tight. We're going to pull all of our tails to the front. We don't want them wigging out on the side. Right now, as you pull on your loops, you want to make sure that you're holding to the middle of your bow, because like I said, we are not completely tight with this. Spread my 3 back here out again, and then you're going to put, this is the 2, so they'll lay in between. So you have 3, 2, and then 1. And we'll do the same thing over here. And then when you have them about where you want them, tighten down like there's no tomorrow. Now I do leave my zip tie on here for a handle while I'm fluffing my bow. I run my fingers along the tails to make sure that my loops are kind of giving a nice curl. At this point, you should be able to yank on loops or tails of any sort in your bow, because if you tightened it down tight enough, they will not go anywhere. So here's all my tails, nice and curly. And then we're going to run our fingers through our bow. Make nice rounded motions. Always use good quality wired ribbon. Even though I said this isn't heavily wired, it does have a small wire in it, but it is of good quality. My favorite is canvas ribbon. That would be this one. It is very heavy. Colors usually are very saturated in them, and they're just a nice ribbon to use. Linen is my second favorite. This I have heard is the hardest part for people, is to fluff. I kind of think it's probably the secondary hardest. Getting the bow constructed, I think, is probably the hardest thing I had to learn. I see these loops are a little floppy on the back, but once you lay them on your wreath, you will be fine. So at this point, I will cut my zip tie off. And then if you find you have a loosey loop or poof, just put your ribbon over it. This is a very easy one to tie onto, because you're just going to go in the middle, just spread out 2 loops. And then you're always going to, when you attach something, you always want to attach it to the wreath frame. So we'll give it, you don't want to pull it down too tight. See how I sucked it down in there? We don't want to give it a black hole of ribbon. So you just want it to lay nicely on top of your bow or your wreath. So I usually give it a couple twists, and then I will anchor it to the frame. Just don't go around and around one wire, because sometimes they'll loosen up. You know, maybe if you have it hanging out and the wind catches it. I kind of do figure 8s over the wire, and I'll probably trim that one. So how many times can you fluff your bow? A million, because you make it and then you flip it over and then you have to puff it again, and then you put it on your wreath and you have to attach it and then you do it again. Switch cameras. But here is your bubble wreath. If you'd like to twist up your little 1.5 inch ribbons, you can do so. If you don't like it, just straighten it back out. And here is your bubble wreath. And if you would like to learn more, please, you are welcome to go to learnfromjeanette.com, and I'm also on Facebook and YouTube. Please like and share and follow. Have a great night and happy crafting.